Many people, when they're thinking about Islam and Europe, they think of the modern times now where Islam is on the increase purely because of immigration or the increased birth rate of the Muslims in Europe. But they forget the fact that Islam has a significant history as being part of Europe. Islam actually being dominant in Europe as well, and even being a ruling force. I welcome Dr. Stef Keris, who is a political scientist and historian, originally from the Balkan Peninsula in Greece especially.
They themselves, the Greeks themselves, don't like actually calling themselves Balkan people because since they joined the European Union in 1981, Greece, there is some connection. Greece itself is a country which is divided in two, I would say, maybe even three. But you have mainland Greece, which is part of the Balkans without a doubt, meaning the culture, the people, the way they look, the traditions. But the island nations, the island people actually, they are very different. Very different. I mean, now a people in this world who have never heard of Islam. I don't think they exist. I mean, if you go in the deepest Amazon, I know that in Suriname, a country in South America, has 25% Muslims.
Really?
A country in South America, Suriname, has 25% Muslims. And there are Muslim villages in the deepest jungle of South America in Suriname.
So that's all for now. For those of you who've been listening, as you can see, a great wealth of knowledge. Many people, when they're thinking about Islam and Europe, they think of the modern times now where Islam is on the increase purely because of immigration or the increased birth rate of the Muslims in Europe. But they forget the fact that Islam has a significant history as being part of Europe. And there is a great, tremendous history of Islam actually being dominant in Europe as well, and even being a ruling force. And to discuss that in more detail, I welcome Dr. Stef Keris, who is a political scientist and historian, originally from the Balkan Peninsula in Greece especially. And welcome. Assalamu alaikum wa
rahmatullah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for taking your time to join us. And straight away, when I mentioned Greece being from the Balkan Peninsula, I mean, that's something not a lot of people would be familiar with that or aware of that.
Well, they themselves, the Greeks themselves, don't like actually calling themselves Balkan people because since they joined the European Union in 1981, Greece, there is some connection. Greece itself is a country which is divided in two, I would say, maybe even three. But you have mainland Greece, which is part of the Balkans without a doubt, meaning the culture, the people, the way they look, the traditions go back to other Balkan countries such as Albania, such as Bulgaria and other countries. But the island nations, the island people actually, they are very different. Very different. And I'm a mix of both because my mother is from an island and my father is from the mainland.
Okay.
So my father looks very much like I would say people think that he's Albanian or Bosnian. And my mother, people think that she's Egyptian, as I think many people believe that I am. So so I think that's where you can see the difference in people already within the same country. But the Balkan Peninsula includes Greece as well as includes Turkey and the rest of up to Vienna, basically. The whole entire peninsula where nowadays there's a very big part of Muslims living, which we figured out after the Yugoslavian war. So we now know that the Balkan Peninsula actually a very big part of European Muslims live there. Indigenous, blonde, blue-eyed Muslims.
Just in a nutshell, a lot of people like myself, I remember I was at college when the war in Europe and the Balkans broke out and the breakup of Yugoslavia. Just give us a dummy's guide as to exactly what happened there. You know, why were the Muslims, especially in Bosnia, fighting with the Christians in Serbia? What was that about?
Very good question, very valid question, because many people, indeed, as you said, they don't know what happened actually. So this entire area, the Balkan Peninsula, was an area, territory which belonged once to the Ottoman Empire. Okay, around 4, 5, 6 centuries even. So what happened with the establishment of the Ottomans in that area, Islam came and became the predominant religion as well. That did not mean, and does not mean, just to make this clear again, just to stress it, it did not mean that Islam was never present there before. It was there before the Ottomans came, but it was never a ruling religion. It was never of the people who lived, the majority people. It became a majority religion once the Ottomans came and occupied basically the entire area, or rather opened it, I would say. So that is the reason why nowadays we still have a lot of Muslims, big Muslim population in Albania, more than 70%. Basically, Albania is a Muslim country. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, more than 63%. In Kosovo, more than 95%.
So whilst these are Muslim, quite a high percentage Muslim populations in these countries, but the actual state religion is not Islam. Obviously.
It's not. No. The official or the majority. These are all majority Muslim countries. Yes, you can call them majority Muslim populations. Yes, but they are not in the way of the Sharia. Is not part of the country. They all lived in communist times. That means that religion, not only Islam, Christianity, Judaism, everything that was present at that time, they were all pushed away. Synagogues were closed. Albania was a terrible country. I mean, all religious buildings that existed there were closed, became stables, or became unbelievable actually what they did out of their religious heritage. And not only, as I said, not only mosques, not only Muslims, but it was the same with the Christians. It was the same. They called it clearly opium for the people, as Karl Marx did.
Really?
So they really followed a die-hard Marxist communist ideology, especially Albania, which declared itself as being the first atheist country in the world. So people, the Muslims who grew up in Albania, did not even know that they're Muslims. They still, until now, they discover, oh yes, my great-grandfather knew the Fatiha.
So you're saying the majority, even countries like Albania, who are identifying as Muslims, are not necessarily practicing Muslims.
That's right. If you want to, yes, I don't like this term, but yeah, it's true. I mean, either you're Muslim or you're not, right? But there is a difference in practicing Muslim, obviously, and Muslims
it's like without digressing too much, in the last census of the UK that was conducted in 2021, the vast majority of the people in this country now no longer identify themselves as being Christians as they once did, or even from the data from the last previous census from 2011. So whilst you could say England, the UK, is a predominantly Christian country, the majority of the people are not practicing. That's why the churches are closing on most places in the UK.
Or become mosques, right?
Yeah. Or restaurants. Yeah.
Or restaurants, right. You're absolutely right. That is something that we're seeing, a secularization of the world nowadays. A secularization in a way that Muslim, non-Muslim, Christian, non-Christian, you see populations moving towards just having a cultural identity with this religion or faith or whatever this might be that they followed, but they actually don't practice it.
Yeah.
And this is the truth for, I think, the majority of the countries in this world nowadays.
So going back to the Balkans, when Yugoslavia, a former communist country, when did the actual problem start in terms of the origins of that Balkans War, the modern Balkans War from the 90s?
Well, okay, the official start of the breakup of Yugoslavia was actually the breakup of the Soviet Union, or the USSR, which existed until 1989-90. The fall of the Berlin Wall, the reunification of the two Germanys. Yeah. So 1989-1990, that was actually the official start. However, the problems in Yugoslavia was a country which was run by Serbs, but we didn't know that. As an outsider at that time, you just saw Yugoslavian people. They all identified with Yugoslavia as a country. So nobody would say, people would. I mean, the inhabitants of Yugoslavia, many of them would say, I'm a Serb, I'm a Croat, I'm a Bosnian. You would hear that. But we're like, what is that? I mean,
more nationalist
where are you from? It's like,
identity.
It is, yes. But they'd never, or many of them did not identify with Yugoslavia as a whole. So they never grabbed, Yugoslavia was never really a country that unified all their nations, all their people. And it was run by Serbs. So the Croats, the Slovenians, the Bosniaks, all these people under them felt that it was the Serbian nationalism was actually ruling them. And they always felt like this. Mm-hmm. So that never stopped. But since, of course, the USSR was not anymore, there was no Soviet support anymore for Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a socialist country.
So were they like propped up by the Soviet Union?
They were, well, they didn't have support anymore. Like most communist countries didn't have support. So it broke within themselves. The system broke down within itself. The whole Eastern Bloc country, all the states from the Eastern Bloc states, they all broke up. So from Poland down to Hungary, down to Albania, Romania, all these countries, that are nowadays part of the European Union, they joined the European Union later. They joined the NATO. Actually, they have joined the Western Alliance, and they follow a very Americanized Western way of life nowadays. Okay, so and that's what they wanted the whole time. So and now we have a Russia, which developed out of the USSR. We have countries such as Lithuania, Latvia, Ukraine, which were all part of the Soviet Union. Belarus, they're all part of the Soviet Union. They all came out of there. So that's basically the history of these countries. And Eastern Europe had within itself quite some Muslim population, Muslim people. Even, as I said, majority Muslim territories. Like nowadays have become countries. Bosnia, Albania, Kosovo. These are majority Muslim countries nowadays. But we were not aware of them that time, because that time the census were not going around asking people what is your religion.
Because it was all under the umbrella of communism.
That's right. So for that reason, I think there's a massive revolution for us Muslims in Europe to realize finally that Islam has always been part of Europe, okay? And now it's coming out even more, especially in the Balkan Peninsula. Now, before the Balkan Peninsula, there was an Islam also in other parts of Europe, in Western, Southwestern Europe, and the Iberian Peninsula, for example, Al-Andalus. And that from the very beginning of the spread of Islam, under the Umayyads, which was actually the end of the 7th, beginning of the 8th century. So this narrative that we hear at schools, and we hear politicians going around and saying Islam is not part of Europe, that came in the 1960s, as you said at the beginning. It came in the 1960s with our parents and grandparents, with a guest worker, so-called guest workers, a terrible word, by the way, invented by the Germans, just to allow them to be guests in our country, to build up our country and our plans, and then go back home where they came from. That was the idea. But that didn't work.
But there was no going back home. There was no going back home.
There was no going back home. Yeah.
So going back, I mean, what is the state of that Balkans region now in terms of Bosnia? All these countries still rebuilding themselves, especially like Bosnia and Serbia. So you've visited Bosnia many times. What is the state of the Muslims in that part of Europe?
Last time I was in Bosnia was just some months ago, and you will not believe there are still buildings with bullet holes.
Okay.
So they've managed to build the city center of Sarajevo. They've managed to build Sarajevo out very nicely, mashallah. It's a beautiful city. It's really worth it to go and visit it. And there's a lot that you will be able to take with you as a Muslim in Europe. Really a lot, mashallah. But there are still scars there. And people, the worst is the people, what they carry inside of them, the psychological scars. I'm not talking about the outside. The outside can be rebuilt, as they did, most of it. But again, there's still some block buildings, still people live in buildings with bullet holes in there. I've seen it myself, subhanAllah. And this is still 20 years later. The war was between 1992 and 1995. And it was a terrible war. It was clearly a war where they clearly attacked the Slavic people who were living with them in the same territory. They called them Turks. They called them go back to where you come from. So just because they were Muslims, they were not Turks. They're not Turks. They're Slavic people, right? They're Bosniak people, most of them.
These are people who were born and bred in there for generations.
Obviously, as I said, they look whiter than me. They're more European than I am. And these people are just Muslims. And because of that,
they were massacred.
Yes. And the terrible massacre in Bosnia, in Srebrenica, was the worst ever after the Second World War. And I think we have to be aware of that. And I miss it at schools here in the UK, for example, in Europe. I miss it, absolutely. I don't see people teaching. This is the reason why I wrote this book, which I gave you today, which is a gift, by the way, mashallah, the Islamic History of Europe, where finally this textbook is supposed to teach our children in Europe, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, whatever they are, that there was once, that Islam was part of this territory of this continent, and still has never left Europe since it came to Europe at the end of the 7th century. Cyprus saw Muslims in the middle of the 7th century. That was the time of the Khilafah Rashidin.
Wow.
Okay, and after that, the time of after the Khilafah Rashidin, when the Umayyads take over, the Umayyads were the biggest dynasty, the one dynasty that actually started the expansion. And the Abbasids take over. But the Umayyads were the ones who actually came to Europe, established emirates like the Emirate of Sicily, the Emirate of Bari in Italy, in Brindisi, in Taranto. These were emirates. Emirate of Crete in Greece. The island of Crete was once an emirate. Okay, all these things we are not told these things. We don't know these things.
Unfortunately, a lot of us, myself included, when we were growing up in schools, we were given a certain narrative. And obviously, not diminishing the horror of the Holocaust in Europe and Germany, but that was an awful episode of in our history, in modern history in Europe. But we seem to gloss over that massacre in Srebrenica,
which was recently.
Which is recently, and worst is, why did we let it happen again? If the memory of the Holocaust was still fresh, literally barely just 40, 50 years earlier, why did we let that happen again in Europe? Where were the so-called political do-gooders who lecture us about morality? Why did they not put a stop to this or avert this tragedy?
Well, that's a question I would like to ask them, actually, exactly. And the worst was the UN. They were present while the massacre happened. The Dutch were there, the Swedes were there, the UN was present, they were present.
So what were they doing, just eating sweets while this was happening?
They were listening, they were wearing actually headsets, and they were listening to their music. That's what is reported. These are reports that came out of that time. I mean, the Dutch were not allowed, they were supposed to be representing the UN.
But what were they doing there?
They were not allowed to interfere.
So what were they doing there then?
You're asking me. It's a question. It's a very good question. It's a very valid question. What were they doing there?
I mean, it's people growing up who probably weren't even born in that time and who are still trying to make sense of these tragedies under our nose in Europe would be asking that question. Quite rightly so. So, why did the political establishments and the elites of that time let this happen? What was the United Nations doing there, and what right do they have to go around lecturing other countries about their, political records and human rights when they let this happen under their nose, on their watch?
It's the same question. This is something that's happening around us now. Don't look, this was just 20, 25 years ago. What about what's happening now around us? What about human rights abuses that are happening on a daily basis in countries that actually claim to be
democracies?
Well, the bearers of democracy, they claim to be that. If you are a country that is supposed to preserve human rights in other countries and you cannot preserve them in your own country, there's a problem. There's a moral failure. Clearly a moral failure. There's no doubt about it.
There's a political vacuum there. That's why extremist ideologies prosper, because they need to be heard, and that's why we're seeing a huge polarization of viewpoints in our societies around the world now. Whether it's the left or it's the right, because in the center, politics has failed us.
Absolutely. I mean, we see in America, for example, the development of liberalist ideology, which has taken everything out of context. I mean, nowadays you can claim to be a dog, and I cannot say you're not. You can be a woman. It does not matter if you have a beard or a penis. You're a woman. If you say you are a woman, you're a woman. I have to affirm that. So this kind of, in contrast to the other ideology, which is an extreme right ideology, again, where you see that in America, you see clearly that they are ready to fight for their rights, which under Donald Trump, it was actually proven when they stormed the Capitol. So these are not small issues we're talking about. We're talking about something extremely serious that is developing nowadays in the world. We're talking about two extremes, and you're absolutely right. The center is not to be seen anywhere. And I believe that we as Muslims could actually fill this gap. We could be there to tell them, listen, guys, it's neither this nor that. We could direct you. Islam can direct you. Okay? And I'm not saying we should have an own party or something. I'm not saying that. I don't think
what are you saying? Are you propagating Sharia law for all these countries? I mean, people listening will be asking that question.
Yes. No, I'm definitely not doing that, because Sharia law can be practiced in a country, should be practiced in a country which is entirely Muslim, which is a majority Muslim country. So I'm not, this is ridiculous to say something like that. In Europe, for example, in the majority countries which are not Muslim, a majority Muslim. The point is that as Muslims, with our moral and ethic background that we have, and our framework that we have, we can help these people actually to find their way back to Christianity. How many times have I told my parents, and I think you know that I'm not a born Muslim, I became Muslim 30 years ago. And my parents are still in their element of being Greek, and I wouldn't call them Orthodox Christians because they're not. But they have this traditional upbringing, traditional Greek, okay? And I tell them, read the Bible. I don't tell them read the Quran. I tell them read the Bible. Because once you have read the Bible, you will understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but see, the Bible in its purest form from the time of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, is no longer available because
That's
it's
correct.
been tampered and doctored and
Correct.
changed. Even yesterday, I was reading that the Church of England is having a debate whether they should now be referring to God in his gender reference of he, because God should be addressed with a gender-neutral terminology. He's not a he and he's not a she. And that's when my head just sank into my head.
Where are we
and I'm
going
thinking,
to, right?
these people have lost the plot, unfortunately.
Yes, they have. Absolutely. They have. Absolutely.
It seems like,
But that's why I say, I think really, sorry, but I really think that's a very important point. If you look at the recent development also with regards to Andrew Tate, you must be aware of the situation. Talking about masculinity and talking about what does it actually mean being a man, what does it mean being a woman. The world is upside down. They're trying to actually to make you believe that a man is a woman and a woman is a man. Raising your children with gender neutral type of ideology. Making our children basically confused from day one. You see now there is a 10-year, I saw it recently, I couldn't believe it, a 10-year-old trans child, kid that goes around in trans shows and whatever and has become very famous. What's going on? What is going on?
Again,
confusion, right?
Dr. Stef, that is a different subject that we can sit here and talk about for hours. And as you know, the world is currently consumed with this debate at this moment in time. Whether, no matter what side of the spectrum that you're on, but this is a huge debate at the time. But going back to our topic about the Balkans and the history of Islam in Europe, tell me about, for benefit of our listeners, about the history, a brief history of how the Ottoman Empire ruled Europe at one stage. Many people don't realize that, do they?
Yeah, you're right indeed. If you look at the Ottoman Empire, just to give you a brief idea, it developed actually at the end of the 13th century, beginning of the 14th actually. 1299 is the official year when the Ottoman Empire became the Ottoman Empire.
And they ruled the world, right?
And ruled the biggest part of the world that was known at that time, right? A very important point also to mention is many people call the Ottomans Turks. Now, a Turk is somebody who developed in 1923. So the idea, the terminology Turk, Turkey, and being Turkish is something that didn't exist during the time of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans never called themselves Turks, never said that we are Turkish or
because
Turks.
Turkey didn't exist at the time.
Turkey exists in 1923. It is as a country, as a republic, as a modern secular republic, by the way. Exists in 1923. So before, that was the Ottoman Empire. And Ottoman citizens, anybody who wanted to be an Ottoman citizen could be an Ottoman citizen. And it was independent of being Muslim, Christian, Jewish. They were following the millet system, which meant that the different millets, the different religious people, let's call it that way, had their own infrastructure within the system. So a Catholic Christian was allowed to be judged by the Pope or by the rules of the Catholic Church. An Orthodox Christian the equivalent. A Muslim was a Muslim, right? A Jew, and so on. So they all had their own jurisdiction. They all had their own people who were taking care of them. So it was not the Sultan actually who was taking care of the Jewish and Christian subjects. It was just the Muslims who were under him. Okay? And this is something fascinating, I find, because whenever something happened in the past under the Ottoman Empire, which people are aware of, suddenly they all scream about, oh, the Ottomans, they were unjust towards the Christians, they were terrible, and they did this and they did that. If you look into history carefully, you see that actually their own Christian rulers did that to their own Christian subjects. It was not the Sultan. He was too busy with his own affairs. The Ottomans were not interested in having Christian subjects, in converting them into Islam. Because to be honest, the zakat, which a Muslim pays, is much less than what the jizya is. Okay, what a Christian has to pay. So there was no interest in converting people.
A form of taxation.
The form of taxation, that's right.
Yeah.
So the taxation for a non-Muslim is called jizya, which a Christian would have to pay. And had to pay.
Do you remember what the percentage was?
I don't remember the percentage. No, I know that the zakat is 2.5%.
I'm asking you. Do you remember as if you lived in that era? I mean,
are
you aware?
Aware of with the sources? No, I mean it was very different. Also,
Yeah.
It was very different depending on the ruler, depending on the times, depending on what was needed, when it was needed. When war was on, it was higher, right? Because they needed money.
But that shows you that the Ottoman Empire, during its reign, when it was supreme, when it was the most powerful sort of entity on this earth, allowed other non-Muslim sort of people and populations to flourish under their rule.
That was always the case.
That was always the case. But now we have a case where Muslims are being subjected to the most greatest form of discrimination and Islamophobia in Europe, whereas Muslims traditionally have been the most tolerant of all religions, of other religions.
Does it surprise you? If you look at the history of the Jews in Europe, who are the oldest monotheistic faith in Europe. Now, if you look at the Jews, was there ever a time in Europe where in Christian Europe where they felt secure and safe? The only time was Al-Andalus. That was the time of the Muslims ruling Spain and the Iberian Peninsula, when there were even Jewish states within Al-Andalus. The Jews had their own territories. The Jews had their own philosophers, the intellectuals, people who were living together and writing books with Muslims. Now, the Christians were participating. Let's be honest. They were participating. But the ones who were really active and the ones who really brought forth intellectual science, they were the Jews and the Muslims. And what happened after that, when Al-Andalus got destroyed in the 15th century, 1492, Granada is the last city, the last bastion of Islam in Europe. When this happened, the Renaissance came up in Europe. The Renaissance was nothing else but to get people aware, to bring them back to the ancient sources, which would have got lost had the Muslims not preserved them. And not only preserve Aristotle and Plato and Sophocles, but also improve and translate them and bring them over to the Christian European world. Okay? The Christians would have never known Aristotle, Sophocles, and Plato. We would have never known them had the Muslims not preserved and improved them. Okay? So this period of Al-Andalus of 7 to 8 centuries was such an important period, which is overlooked totally in our history books. We're talking about 700, of course deliberately, 700 to 800 years. This is half of our time in Islam. We are now in the 15th century in Islam. Half of our time played in Al-Andalus. This is not a minor, insignificant period of time. For Europe, 700, 800 years. That is not nothing. That is not nothing. So Christian nations, the way that they are nowadays in Europe, would have never been able to develop had the Muslims not been there before to get them to open their eyes. Because to be honest, the Christian church, especially the Catholic church at the time, they were happy with them closing their eyes, okay, and getting them to become ignorant.
I was just going to say that was the age of ignorance, wasn't
Absolutely. The Middle Ages were the Dark Ages, as they call them, but they don't mean the Muslim part, of course, they mean the Christian part, which is absolutely true.
So, you know, the Ottoman Empire's rule and reign, how far did it stretch out into Europe?
It started actually in Greece, in what is nowadays Greece, all the way in the north of Greece, up to Vienna. Vienna was besieged twice, the capital of Austria. It was besieged twice, in the 16th century once and in the 17th century, 1683, the last one. And after the last siege in 1683, so the end of the 17th century, that's when we see that the Ottoman power diminishes. We see that the Ottomans disappear slowly from Europe. We see that their might becomes less, of course. Others take over. In Asia, they had lost already a lot. Europe is becoming more and more a continent where the Ottomans are just seen as being there, but not ruling.
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, at that time in the 17th, 18th centuries, they would start making fun of the Ottoman, the sick men of the Bosporus, they start calling them, whereas before they were scared of anybody wearing a turban. So things changed drastically.
What is the reason for that decline, do you think?
Various reasons. I mean, the typical historical reason is that after a while, an empire that's
becomes complacent.
Yes, there is no empire in the world that lasted longer than 1,000 years, even the Roman Empire. So 1,000 years, that's top. Now, but having reached 700-800 years, that's about the time, isn't it? So there is a time, that's the one historical reason. But there is also, of course, other reasons. Now, as a Muslim, we know as Muslims that empires that decline, or Muslim empires that come to the phase of decline, you see that what comes with the decline is an increase of the art of beauty. For example, singing. You will see that people, luxury,
debauchery.
Absolutely. So all this is part of a declining Muslim empire. So Ibn Khaldun says, actually in his Muqaddimah, he says the last craft that comes up in a civilization is the craft of music and singing, and the first one to disappear is the craft of music and singing. So the last one to come and the first one to disappear. Very interesting, isn't it? So there is Ibn Khaldun was not nobody. I mean, very biggest intellectual who lived in the 14th century, and he wrote a book, Al-Muqaddimah, which I really would advise anybody to read now. Even nowadays, very, very valid what he writes in his book, even for nowadays.
I mean, these personalities we need to learn. We need to educate and inform more people, especially the younger generations, about these personalities, because a lot of them now are falling for the wrong type of, role models out there, like Andrew Tate, you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
The real personalities. I mean, first and foremost, the best of creation, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. But after them, obviously you got the four caliphs of the Islamic Empire and the Islamic religion after the beloved Prophet, peace be upon him. And obviously the personalities that have contributed so much into the arena of science, education and politics in the latter modern aspects of the religion, the centuries later, after the passing away of the beloved Prophet, peace be upon him. But even Spain has a history of Islam, which is still preserved in many forms in terms of the grand mosques and the architecture. Tell us a little bit about that.
MashaAllah, the period of Al-Andalus, which I mentioned before, is the Muslim period of Spain and Portugal, by the way. Portugal, the very name of Portugal, the country didn't exist before the Muslims. So Portugal was just a part of Hispania, as the Romans and the Goths called this area. So the Romans ruled that area before, and then the Germanic tribes, the Goths and the Vandals, they took over. So when the Muslims arrived in Spain in 711, basically at a place which is called Gibraltar, which nowadays is British territory. When they arrived there, the very name Gibraltar is Arabic, by the way. It comes from Jibr al-Tariq, right?
I was just going to ask you to mention that.
Yes. Gibraltar, Jibr al-Tariq, meaning the mountain or the hill of Tariq. Who? Tariq bin Ziyad, the first one to arrive basically in Spain. And from that moment, from 711 on, the entire southwestern Europe up to France, Islam became part of that, and until the day of today it hasn't left. Now, not as a ruling faith, a dominant faith anymore. However, Muslims...
Right. So as a dominant faith and a dominant ruling party, it covered France as well.
A big part of France. There was once a part which was called fraxinetum in Latin, fractionate in Arabic. Yeah. So which was a coastal area which belonged to the Muslims. So from there on, the Muslims and French Muslims as well, Frankish, let's call them Frankish because there was no France at the time. So Frankish Muslims would actually attack Switzerland. Even the south of Switzerland once, where they speak Italian and French nowadays, used to be an emirate for around 100 years. Mm-hmm. So the south of Switzerland, which they had the ban of minarets nowadays recently, even they used to be part of the Muslim empire. So they were once Muslims, yes.
So basically, it stopped on the edge of the continent before it came to the UK. So.
Well, Britain had a very interesting history, actually, especially because as Protestants, they were shunned by the Catholic nations in Europe. So they actually also allied with the Ottomans for a while. And during the time of the Ottomans, there were some treaties that were signed between the British royals and actually the Ottoman Empire, especially against France, because the arch enemy of Britain was rather France than the Muslims, actually. Yeah. So during the time of Al-Andalus, by the way, just to go that time back, in the 9th century, if you go to the British Museum of London, and if you go to the coin section, you will find something amazing. You will find coins from the 9th century, printed by King Offa, actually 8th century, 780, 8th century, printed by King Offa, who at that time was an Anglo-Saxon king. And he had these coins minted with his name on the one side in Latin, Offa Rex, meaning King Offa. And on the other side, it would say, La ilaha illallah in Arabic.
Wow.
These coins, you can find them nowadays. Take your children and go to the British Museum in London and go and see them. It's amazing. They're very tiny, very small. However, if you know about the history and you find them, you see them, it's amazing. Our children need to see that. The same like you could find the Ballycotton cross, also in the British Museum in London, which they found in Ballycotton, which is a place in Ireland, which has is a cross as we know it, but in the middle of it, it says the Basmala, it says Bismillah with Arabic. So the question until the day of today is we don't know.
Behind that?
That's the question. We don't know exactly.
And even the La ilaha currency.
That is a question. Many say that because we're talking about the 7th, 8th centuries now, we're talking about a time where the Muslims were the civilization in the world and in Europe, so that everybody else would actually copy them.
Aspire to be
Muslim. You know that in Paris and in London, during that time, 8th and 9th centuries, there would be the aristocrats who would run around with turban, being dressed, looking actually as Muslims, because that was the in thing that time. It was fashionable. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. So, and now you would be laughed at, you would be ashamed to actually wear a turban and run around as a Muslim, looking at somebody. That does not mean that you're less a Muslim if you don't wear it. That's not what I'm saying. Obviously, I'm not wearing a turban. But what I'm saying is, looking like a Muslim or being proud of being a Muslim is nowadays frowned upon.
I mean, even if you look at in the Middle East, I mean, I've traveled quite extensively throughout, the countries like, Tunisia, Morocco, and these Arab sort of countries, and it seems there's a huge westernization. And one of the signs of a decline in people's standards and values is when they want to start looking like somebody else. In terms of their dress and their attire, they've stopped wearing their own traditional clothes and they want to copy the West and wearing jeans and t-shirts, and that again, to me, points out to some form of insecurity.
Yes, absolutely. Being insecure about who you are, wanting to be somebody else. Yeah. I mean, that happened in the Ottoman Empire as well. When you look at the sultans, for example, up to a certain period of time, they were wearing the sultan's attire. They would be dressed as you imagine a sultan, right? With turban and the appearance of a sultan, the beard, everything. However, from the time that they started copying the French, who were at that time the superpower like the Americans nowadays, so they started copying the French and they started being dressed and looking like French, even cutting the beard. That is something that was unimaginable, even under the Christians. Yeah. You would not. I mean, the priests in Greece, the Orthodox priests, they all have beards. You wouldn't see a priest without a beard. So why do we Muslims nowadays think that the beard has to go off in order to look more civilized and more Western and more civilized?
It's a preferred look for many people. But coming back to the more modern era now in Europe, obviously, what I started off with is that many people think that Islam does not have a long history being in Europe. They think, for those who are not so educated and informed, they think that Europe has only sort of witnessed the rise and influx of Islam through this immigration that we've had in the last probably mostly 100 years, and which is obviously still happening. A lot of people, Muslims, still trying to get into Europe. And also, I mean, I remember watching a documentary. When I said documentary, some program somebody recorded, like a documentary, where they were talking about the Islamization of Europe. And what was the crux of that argument is that Islam will be the most majority, sort of Muslims will be the majority population of Europe, mainly because of their increased birth rate and immigration. And it's not just only that, though, is it?
Of course not.
There's something else.
This, I know the video that you're talking about, obviously it was going around that time. It has calmed down. Alhamdulillah, people have realized that people talk a lot of nonsense. First of all, it will never happen by 2050, let's say, yeah? It will never happen that the European government of nowadays would allow this to happen. Okay? And they would do anything to make it to make sure that this doesn't happen. So this will never happen. That's one thing. Even if it's a natural progress, as they say that because of high birth rates and whatever. This is not the case. First of all, birth rates are even in the Muslim world are decreasing. Actually, that's one thing. Second of all, what is the population of Muslims in Europe? In the entire of Europe, I mean, it's not more than 5% at this moment. So come on, let's be honest. So it means 95% of Muslims.
I think that's more of a propaganda video.
It is. It was
right-wing propaganda video.
Of course it was. That's exactly what it was. Okay. So, and if you're living in an area where you have a majority of Muslims, it happens. I mean, you do have ghettos in Europe, and not only in the UK, but you have them also in Germany and in France and in many places in Europe, where you, as a white French, white German Christian, you live in that area and you're surrounded by Muslim families, you might start believing that indeed they're taking over. But then you go a little bit further outside of Paris or outside of your arrondissement or your territory neighborhood, and suddenly you just see white people, white faces. So what about that? So yes, if you ask people in the UK, you go to Birmingham, to an area called Small Heath, and you ask white people in Small Heath how many Muslims are there in this country, they will tell you 90%. Because that's what they see around them, 90% Muslims. Yeah. But outside of Small Heath is white people, Christians. Yeah. You know, the majority population of this country is 99% non
Yeah, I think it's a natural inclination, let's say birds of a feather flock together, that most Muslim people tend to flock to areas where there's going to be other Muslim people, there are going to be their places of worship, their own halal meat.
Exactly.
The Jews will go to places where there'll be a synagogue or kosher meat. So you'll find pockets around the UK where there'll be a cluster of Jewish people.
Right.
So, you know, that is not a reflection of what is happening throughout Europe or throughout the UK. So there is a lot of scaremongering going on.
There is. And we do have, unfortunately, brother, we have quite a big population of uneducated and illiterate people in the UK. Unfortunately, as much as I like this country, I came to this country 20 years ago, and I came voluntarily myself. Nobody forced me, and I'm still here after 20 years. And if I compare it to Germany, France, Italy, Holland, these are countries I know very well. It is the best country for Muslims to live in Europe. Still nowadays.
Best country in what respect?
In respect of respect, actually tolerate and respect us, leave us in peace. Let's put it that way. Okay, I'm not talking about people loving us, but I'm talking about leaving us in peace and being able to live and to still eat halal meat, which is forbidden, by the way, in Germany. It's forbidden to slaughter halal.
So how are the Muslims coping there?
Well, they're importing from outside. They're importing from countries like Denmark, imagine that. They're importing from countries like Holland, or they're slaughtering in Holland because they're immediately close to it. In Poland, they're slaughtering and bringing it over. So there are countries like that. They're discussing, in France, they have been discussing for a while already to forbid halal food.
And the banning of the burqa, the hijab.
All this is already there. That's not new. That is already there. So it's going to directions that we cannot imagine. Whereas we thought, I remember how we were talking about this 20, 30 years ago when we said, if they did something like halal meat, they want to ban it. Then you would have the Jews saying, hey, no, we can't do that because kosher halal basically is no big difference, right? Yeah. So or circumcision. They were discussing this, by the way. Alhamdulillah, it is gone. I haven't heard anything about it. But they were discussing of not allowing Muslims to circumcise their boys.
Okay.
Then we thought, oh, the Jews would come up and would say, no, we do that too. But seemingly, there is, even in European mindset, there is a kind of, no. The Jews, okay. But the Muslims, no. So it's seemingly going, what I see now, I don't see any...
The best example I can give you about that, just a recent, maybe, just days or a week or so ago, about the person who burnt the Quran in Sweden.
In Sweden, yes.
When somebody else said, I want to burn the Torah, he was actually stopped and told that that's anti-Semitic. But burning the Quran is a freedom of speech and freedom of expression.
Absolutely.
So there is a huge hypocrisy that Muslims have to endure.
What's going on? What is going on exactly? What does it mean to us? I think really I have to look at it as a father of 7 children, alhamdulillah, as a husband, as a Muslim male, Muslim European. I'm looking further, and I think what I want to reach with my work is to break this narrative that Islam is not part of Europe, that Europe is built on Christian roots, and now there's Jewish Christian civilization, which up to the Second World War it was just Christian. Now it's Jewish Christian, Judaism and Christianity. But what do we need to? We need to educate these people, the average European, that Islam has been part of Europe as much as Islam, as old as Islam is, and has influenced Europe in such a way that we would have not been able to be as we are nowadays had Islam not been part of Europe. So this is my work, and this is my mission and vision in life, actually. I want to really break through these narratives and these ideas that are going around.
Despite, Dr. Stef, despite these narratives, this propaganda, right-wing ideology, that hasn't stopped a lot of non-Muslims reverting or converting to Islam. There's a huge rise of the Muslim population through non-Muslims who are actually declaring their faith into Islam.
Since when? Since when?
Since from the time.
Since 9/11. Before my time, I became Muslim. If I look around and I meet people in Germany, in Switzerland, in Holland, wherever I travel, and I see European brothers and sisters, and whenever I ask them, they all converted after September 11.
Really?
I'm pretty much one of the only ones of the older people. I converted. I became Muslim in 1992, which was 10 years nearly before September 11, right? But what I see now is September 11 was the push for many Europeans to say, yes, I wanted to actually find out, is it really that bad? And who are these Muslims? So 9/11 did us a favor. Okay, the media and the coverage and this scaremongering since 9/11 did us a favor as Muslims in Europe. Yeah. So that we actually have a massive amount, you're absolutely right. Official numbers are of course much lower than the unofficial ones. We're talking about 150 to 200,000 British converts, officially. Official. So unofficial, of course, I would say double, I would dare saying double the amount. Germany has more than 250,000 German Muslims officially. So unofficially, for sure, 500,000. France has officially 500,000 French Muslims, converts.
Really? Wow.
Officially.
I mean, that's quite bizarre considering France is one of the
Yes.
most Islamophobic countries in Europe.
I would turn it around. Maybe that's exactly why it is Islamophobic. Maybe that's exactly their fear. That's exactly it. They see, they realize, there is a realization. Italy and France are the most Islamophobic countries in Europe, next to Denmark and Sweden, countries like these. But of importance, countries of importance, Italy and France. And in Italy and France, you will find the majority converts actually in the whole of Europe.
Really? Wow.
Italian mosques are run, and I know them personally, I know a lot of administrations.
So things like 9/11, especially the the coverage after the 9/11 event has been most sort of severe, most sort of hostile for Muslims, but it has had an adverse effect where it's given Islam a higher sort of coverage and space in the news, which it previously would never have had.
No doubt about it.
It's increased people's curiosity and interest.
No doubt about it. How many people, I mean, show me now a people in this world who have never heard of Islam. I don't think they exist. I mean, if you go in the deepest Amazon, I know that in Suriname, a country in South America, has 25% Muslims.
Really?
A country in South America, Suriname, has 25% Muslims. And there are Muslim villages in the deepest jungle of South America in Suriname.
Wow.
Okay? So, show me a place where they have never heard of Muslims and Islam. I don't think that exists.
What's your prognosis for Muslims in Europe next 50 years?
I have to try to be a little bit more, let's say, child-friendly. It's a YouTube video. It's people try to, I don't want to be too pessimistic.
Yeah.
But as Muslims, we have to be optimistic.
Yeah.
Okay? But I also want to be realistic. And as I said before, in case it would reach the numbers that they were talking about because of childbirth and migration and all this stuff, becoming a majority faith in Europe by 2050, I'm sure that something bad would happen to reverse that. Okay?
Well,
so I don't think
Europe's
it would...
not ready for a Muslim majority.
Europe has never been ready for a Muslim majority. Definitely not. They were not even ready for a Jewish majority, and they made sure that it never happened. And it never happened, right?
You talked about birth rates, and actually Muslim, especially in the West, we're copying the Western trends as Muslims by having a lower birth rate now. We're practicing family planning, which previous generations didn't do. I mean, you're very unusual. You said you have 7 children.
Yes, alhamdulillah.
But I know many modern couples now would be happy just to stop at 1 child or two children. And if anything, that is an actual... That does not contribute to population growth, 1 or 2 children.
True, but don't forget again, on the other hand, we do have massive issues on this planet. I mean, we have pollution, we have the climate change, we have really serious issues that, to be very honest, is a question nowadays. If my 2 older sons, the oldest one is married, the second one is looking, but they are now in the stage of really considering the issue of, do we want children, yes or not? For a Muslim, there is no question. Of course you want children. However, I can understand the reluctance. I can understand when you say, like, what is happening? We were just talking about the issue of LGBTQ. We were talking about what is being taught nowadays at schools. We're talking about where these societies are moving to.
It's a scary place to be raising children.
It has become a very scary place to be raising children. Yes, that's all. That's what I would say. Yes, yes.
But that doesn't mean that we stop producing.
We should even. I mean, subhanallah, we know that the hadith of, even if you see, now I'm paraphrasing, of course, even if you see destruction coming towards you, you still plant the last flower that you have. That's absolutely true, no doubt about it. That's what I'm saying. As Muslims, we have to be optimistic, even when you see destruction coming towards you. No doubt, sure. However, I can understand the skepticism. Okay, I can understand. We're having these kind of discussions at home.
Many people are, and this is again, as I said, a very big topic, very wide topic, a very sort of current and very pertinent discussion for this modern time. But I think we need to perhaps get together for a special discussion with other guests on that.
Definitely.
And tell me, before we wrap up, tell me about your own sort of plans now as regards to what you are involved in terms of the Al-Muqaddimah Institute and what you are trying to do and achieve through that.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, Jazakallah khair, it's very important, I think, to educate people. I mean, I've been in education for the last 25, 30 years of my life. And in various fields of education. First of all, English teaching and teaching as a language teacher. But as somebody who studied political science and history, I moved towards that field as well on an academic level. So that we started an institute 2 years ago, Al-Muqaddimah, and you can find us online, almuqaddimah.com, where we teach the Muqaddimah, the book of Ibn Khaldun, where you can find issues of sociology, political science, religion, the faith itself, many things actually, psychology, all this is part of it. So we are at this moment teaching a diploma for a year, and the new one is starting in October this year, inshallah. So whoever is interested can come and join us. But also we teach Islamic history, historiography. We teach the Islam in Europe book that I just presented, also spoke about before, meaning the history of the Muslims in Europe, from Al-Andalus to the Ottomans to the Tatars to the Vikings in the north, where you can find...
We had Muslim Vikings?
We had Muslim Vikings in the north, subhanAllah. I mean, that's again a topic for another time, inshallah. But there were Muslim Vikings in the north, yes, once, in the 10th century. So all this is part of this institute, and all this, we have different courses we offer. So just almuqaddimah.com and you will find more about us, inshallah. So I think education is really the door out for all of us, from young to old.
I think you're doing a great job, Dr. Stef Keris, in educating and informing people, especially about, the significance of Islam and in Europe historically and for the present times as well. And I think we need more ambassadors who can really take this message out and give people the true light of what Islam is about, so we can overcome the negative propaganda that the mainstream media or the wrong kind of information that is being presented to people. So no doubt we'll catch up with you again. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a great pleasure. And we'll discuss this on more other relevant topics again in the future. So that's all for now. For those of you who've been listening, as you can see, a great wealth of knowledge from a academic like Dr. Stef Keris, and here to educate and inform us about even modern day episodes like the Balkans War of the 90s. Many people are oblivious as to the true origins, the history, and the reasons for that conflict and the genocide that happened right under our nose in modern day Europe. After the Holocaust, when we said never again something like this we will allow to happen. But as we've heard, not only it did happen again, but it's also happening again right in front of our eyes in this current day and age around the world. So through education, through information, and through raising awareness, we want to educate people to have the right mindset and see beyond the headlines and challenge the false narratives. Thank you for your time, and please subscribe to the channel so we can keep you updated and keep bringing you interesting content like this. Thank you for listening.